This woman didn't leave her cheating husband. She staged his funeral while he was still alive. Step by step, quietly, legally, brutally. First she found the affair, then she found the hidden accounts. Then she found out her husband had stolen from a man who never forgives betrayal. And from that moment on, his downfall was just a matter of timing.
Feels. Victor Hale was halfway through a toast about stewardship when the room forgot how to breathe. It happened so fast that for one bright, splendid second, nobody understood what had changed. Feels. One moment he was standing beneath the chandeliers of the Whitmore ballroom, smiling that polished, inherited smile of his, with 800 people angled toward him in black tie and silk and old money. The next, Feels. His hand tightened around the stem of his champagne flute, and his eyes moved past the crowd to the doors at the back of the room as if something in the architecture had betrayed him. That was where she stood. Evelyn. Not the pale, Feels' apologetic wife most of that room remembered from previous galas. Not the elegant ghost who used to trail half a step behind Victor, smiling on cue, speaking when spoken to, disappearing into the scenery of her husband's success. Feels. This woman was very still, very deliberate, diamonds at her throat, dark silk, no hesitation in her posture. Feels. And beside her was a man whose presence did belong to charity dinners or polished speeches. Adrian Volkov. That name alone moved through the room like a cold draft under a locked door. People in finance knew it without ever admitting they knew it. Feels. People in politics knew it and pretended not to. People with enough power to think they feared no one learned, sooner or later, that there are forms of power that do not need microphones. Victor's mouth remained open just a fraction too long. Feels. It was not enough for most people to notice. It was enough for Evelyn. She noticed everything now. She noticed the senator in the second row go stiff in his seat. She noticed Scarlet Vane, 2 tables from the stage, set her glass down too carefully. Feels. She noticed how the musicians near the sidewall kept playing for a moment, then let the sound die as the room's attention rearranged itself. Victor recovered quickly. Men like him always did. His smile returned. Smaller. Tighter. Feels. The kind of smile that said trouble is only trouble if other people understand it. Evelyn, he said into the microphone, trying for warmth and landing somewhere closer to alarm dressed as charm. Well, there you are. Feels. The room turned to look from him to her, then to Adrian, then back again. Evelyn began to walk, not fast, not slow. She walked as if the length of that ballroom belonged to her, as if every polished foot of it had been waiting for this exact crossing. Feels. Adrian kept pace beside her, one hand loose at his side, expression unreadable. He was not touching her. He did not need to. The fact that he was there at all was contact enough. 6 months earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, Feels. Evelyn Hart had been standing at a tall window in a 22-room house that echoed with other people's preferences, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold because nobody had ever asked how she took it. Her husband had left at 6:30. Feels. He always left at 6:30. Feels. He had kissed the top of her head without looking at her and told her not to wait up because he had dinner in the city. She had stood there in the east drawing room, watching leaves scrape across the lawn in the wind. Feels. Feeling the kind of loneliness that does not feel dramatic from the inside. It feels administrative, repetitive, like being ripped in small daily installments. There was no storm that morning, no screaming match, no intuition sharpened by jealousy. Feels. Just a hum from the spare phone Victor kept on the console table because he used to claim reception was better near the pool deck. The phone vibrated once, then again, 3 short pulses. Feels. Evelyn had looked at it with the dead calm of a woman who had spent years teaching herself not to ask questions she did not want answered. Then she crossed the room and picked it up. Victor had never given her the passcode. Feels. Victor had also never been imaginative. His mother's birthday had opened more than one locked thing in that marriage. Feels. It opened this too. The first message on the screen was explicit, careless. Intimate in the lazy way betrayal becomes intimate when it has been going on long enough. Tonight, wear the red one. I want you in it and then out of it. Evelyn did not gasp. Feels. She did not collapse. She did not call anyone. She stood in the center of that room and read. She read months of messages. Hotel confirmations, late-night jokes, complaints about meetings, pet names, room numbers. The kind of fast, Feels. Ugly tenderness reserved for people who believe they are protected by secrecy. The woman's name was Scarlet Vane, 26, Junior Vice President of Acquisitions at Hale Capital. Evelyn had met her once at a Christmas party. Navy dress, good posture, heels, sharp eyes. Victor's hand resting a half-second too long on the small of her back during introductions. At the time, Evelyn had dismissed the thought because women are trained, early and efficiently, not to embarrass themselves by noticing too much. Heels. She scrolled farther. Then she saw the message that changed the quality of the betrayal. She has no idea. She never will. Women like Evelyn don't ask questions. She's furniture. Furniture. Heels. Evelyn stared at the word until the room around her seemed to tilt. Furniture. Something placed, useful, decorative if maintained, silent by design. It was not the affair alone that transformed her. It was the contempt. Affairs are weakness. Heels. That word was philosophy. It revealed the architecture of her marriage more honestly than any vow ever had. She put the phone back exactly where she found it, screen down, 3 inches from the lamp. Then she walked upstairs, heels. Sat on the edge of the bed she had chosen in a showroom on Madison Avenue, and realized she was not going to cry. That frightened her more than tears would have, because tears would have meant she was still inside the life she had been living. Heels. This calm meant she was already half outside it. She gave herself 3 days to behave normally. Heels. 3 days to let nothing show, to kiss him at the door, to ask about meetings, to laugh in the correct places, to observe. On the 4th day, she drove 40 minutes out of the city. Heels. Found a gas station with a payphone that smelled like old cologne and heat, and called Diane Kessler. Diane had a reputation among wealthy women, passed in whispers over charity lunches, and after too much gin at benefit dinners. Heels. If you ever need to disappear from a bad marriage, call Diane. She's a surgeon. You don't feel the cut until you're already on the other side of the room. Evelyn remembered that line. She remembered the cocktail napkin. Heels. She remembered that she had once tucked the number into a book Victor would never open, because men like Victor liked owning libraries more than reading them. Diane answered after 20 seconds. Her voice was low and precise. Evelyn said, heels. I need to leave my husband without him knowing I've left, until there's nothing left to fight over. Heels. Diane did not ask if Evelyn was sure. She asked, what does he own that he thinks you can't touch? That question was the beginning. Not because it promised revenge, because it shifted Evelyn's mind from injury to evidence, from grief to structure. Heels. When Evelyn sat in Diane's office 2 days later, she laid out the terms of the marriage as they existed on paper. The prenup was brutal. $2 million, a car, heels, and a Hamptons cottage placed in her name as a wedding gift by Victor's father years ago, probably by accident, because the men in that family had a habit of underestimating women while congratulating themselves on their understanding of risk. Heels. Everything else belonged to Victor. The house on Ashbury Lane, the Manhattan apartment, the cars. Hale Capital itself. Diane listened without interruption, then asked a better question. What exists off paper? Heels. That was when Evelyn began to tell the truth she had barely admitted to herself. Heels. About the dinner in March when Victor, drunker than intended, had talked about invoices and receipts that did not match, about the Gulf shipping deal, about the late-night conversations overheard through a study door. Heels. About regulators and burying things under other transactions. About a safe behind a painting in the library that Evelyn had opened months before out of instinct and found a ledger she did not yet know how to read, heels, then put back in exactly the same position because survival had already taught her something about timing. Diane did not romanticize what Evelyn was describing. She removed her glasses. She looked straight at her and said, heels. You're telling me your husband may be a criminal, Evelyn answered. I'm telling you I'm married to a man who thinks I'm furniture, and furniture doesn't read ledgers, but it turns out I do. Diane smiled then, briefly. Not because it was amusing, heels, because it was useful, heels. Over the next 4 months, Evelyn learned the discipline of quiet retaliation. She opened bank accounts under her maiden name in a small Connecticut town nobody in Victor's orbit had reason to visit. Evelyn Marsh. The name felt strange at first, heels. Then right. She photographed the ledger 1 page at a time over 11 nights while Victor stayed at the city apartment or met Scarlett in hotels he imagined were discreet. She scanned documents from his study. She kept everything in place, heels. She learned the exact angle of his pens in the tray, the position of the paperweight, the distance between the decanter and the edge of the shelf. She stopped wearing perfume because she wanted to know how long it would take him to notice, heels. He never did. Diane gave her a tiny camera no bigger than a lipstick tube. Evelyn used it to film the men who arrived after dark and left with different briefcases than the ones they brought. Eels. She filmed Victor taking calls in the study he claimed were from donors or bankers or lawyers. Some nights she lay beside him and listened to him breathe and thought, with a calm that would have horrified the younger version of herself. Eels. This is the last winter you will ever sleep beside me and mistake my silence for ignorance. The story could have remained there. A realistic, ugly story about money, contempt, and a smart woman extracting herself from a rotten marriage. Eels. But reality often becomes stranger, not less believable, when money hardens into impunity. The first time Diane said Adrian Volkov's name, it was snowing. Evelyn was in the back of a car heading home from another strategy session. Eels. Diane called and said there was a complication. The shipping company in the Gulf, the one tied to Victor's hidden accounts, was not his. He had not built that pipeline. He had skimmed from it. Eels. He had been stealing for years from someone who did not resolve disputes with carefully worded letters. Evelyn asked who. Diane told her, 41 years old. Came to the city at 22. Once drove for a man named Kasparian. By 28, Eels. Kasparian was dead and Volkov owned the business, and 3 of Kasparian's lieutenants worked for him. On paper, he controlled a shipping firm, a construction company, 2 restaurants, a gallery. Off paper, much more, never charged, never interviewed. Eels. Hard to search, harder to pin down, the kind of man whose absence from headlines meant more than publicity ever could. Evelyn asked what he looked like. Diane said after a pause, Eels. Like a man who has never in his life been told he could not have something. Then she added the part that changed everything. She had had dinner with him. He knew Victor's name. He knew someone inside Victor's house had found the ledger. Eels. Evelyn asked to meet him. Diane refused the first time, refused the second. Eels. 2 weeks later, she texted an address and an hour and added 2 instructions. Do not be late and do not wear anything he could pull off and sell. The place turned out to be a room above a restaurant. Eels. Reached by a narrow back staircase that smelled like lemon and hot oil. There was 1 table, 1 man sitting at it, 2 men by the window who managed to look at everything and nothing. Adrian stood when Evelyn entered. He was taller than Victor. Not young, Eels. Not soft, not trying to be charming. White shirt open at the collar, no tie. Face from another era, the kind that would not look place in a black and white photograph from a war nobody wanted explained. He poured wine. His hands were steady. Eels. A scar ran along his right thumb. He asked if she had found the ledger. She said yes. He asked how many times she had opened the safe. She said 41. He asked why she kept count. Eels. She said because the day she stopped counting would be the day she started lying to herself. Eels. Something shifted in his expression then. Not warmth, recognition. She had rehearsed a speech for that meeting. Something strategic, controlled, sensible. Instead, she told the truth, that Victor had taken 7 years of her life and spent them elsewhere. Eels. That she could destroy him in court and walk away with the settlement the prenup allowed. But that would not reach the part of him that needed to feel this. She wanted him publicly unmade. Eels. She wanted him to become the story powerful men tell each other in lowered voices. She could do part of it. Adrian could do the rest. What would it cost? Adrian listened. Then he said she misunderstood the meeting. He did not want to be hired. Eels. He wanted to know whether they wanted the same thing. If they did, he would not take money from her. He would offer her a share of whatever was recovered when Victor collapsed. Then she gave her own condition. Not in the beginning. Not in the middle. Eels. At the end, Victor could know, but only at the end. Eels. She wanted him to think she had broken, run, failed. She wanted him to laugh about her in private. She wanted him comfortable. Eels. Then she wanted to walk into a room where he was standing and let him understand in 1 second that every good thing he had lost in the previous 6 months had been her hand on the knife. Adrian looked at her for a long moment and said, Eels. That is not a condition. That is the plan. So when she crossed the ballroom now, she was not simply returning to a public stage. She was stepping into a design that had been built through months of patience, paper trails, and emotional discipline. Eels. And if this sounds like fiction, that is only because people still underestimate how much can happen under the surface of ordinary seeming lives. Real power rarely arrives with dramatic music. It arrives in bank statements, in calendars, Eels, in legal language, in the tone a husband uses when he no longer sees the person in front of him. Eels. The true lesson of what happened to Victor Hale did not begin in that ballroom. It began the day he confused access with ownership. The day he decided the woman who knew the layout of his home, the rhythms of his voice, the habits of his dishonesty, heels, and the shape of his ambition was too gentle to become dangerous. If there is anything educational in this story, anything worth carrying beyond the thrill of revenge, it is this. Contempt is the most expensive mistake an arrogant person can make, heels. Not because it wounds, because it blinds. Victor spent years building an empire, and one Tuesday afternoon he handed the blueprint to the person best positioned to bring it down, heels. When Evelyn vanished for 6 days, Victor did what men like Victor always do when something they took for granted moves out of reach. He panicked privately and performed concern publicly. His texts arrived quickly at first. "Where are you?" Heels. "Marguerite says you didn't come home." Then softer. "Sweetheart, you scared me. Come back, I'll be better. I promise." Evelyn was in a hotel Diane had booked under her maiden name, sitting in a chair by the window with a cup of tea cooling beside her, heels, staring down at a city that looked honest only from a distance. She read his messages twice, then set the phone face down and called Diane instead. "He's scared," she said. Diane answered, "Good," heels. That was one of the first difficult things Evelyn learned in those months. Fear in the right person is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is clarity. Victor was not afraid because he had hurt her, heels. He was afraid because he had lost visual control of the object he believed belonged within his frame, heels. That distinction matters. It matters in marriages, in workplaces, in families, in every human system where one person mistakes dependence for devotion, heels. Many women spend years doubting their own perception because the people around them are skilled at manufacturing comfort while withdrawing respect. Victor knew how to say, "I love you" in a tone that implied care without requiring introspection, heels. He knew how to buy flowers that apologized for nothing. He knew how to return from trips with gifts calibrated to postpone questions, heels. He knew how to move through elite spaces as a man others trusted because he had the grooming and the cadence and the inherited confidence of someone who had rarely been meaningfully contradicted. Evelyn knew this about him, heels. She also knew Diane was right. Men like Victor did not become safer when cornered. They became more attentive. Attention could be used. So she came home on a Monday, heels. She stood in the foyer and cried on cue, though some of the tears were real, not for the reasons he thought. Victor held her. He smelled faintly of another woman's shampoo and expensive whiskey. He told her he loved her, heels. He stroked her hair and suggested she was stressed, tired, overwhelmed. He offered to take care of everything. Evelyn said okay in a small voice and let him believe he had regained the advantage, heels. Over his shoulder, she watched the doorway to the study, where the safe sat behind the painting of the horse his grandfather had bought in 1958. In that moment, she understood something else about power, heels. Most people are undone not by force, but by the stories they most want to believe. Victor wanted to believe Evelyn had cracked under emotional strain and come back because he was still her center of gravity. That story made him tender, heels. The tenderness made him careless. He began drinking earlier in the day. He suggested weekends away. He reached for her more often, heels. He told her they should reconnect, repair things. He became, in flashes, almost the man she had once loved. That was the cruel part. Not because it tempted her back into the marriage, heels. Because it reminded her that charm can coexist comfortably with dehumanization. People like simple villains. Life rarely provides them. Life gives you handsome men who ask whether you slept well and then text their mistress from the bathroom, heels. Life gives you executives who fund hospitals and manipulate shell companies. Life gives you women like Scarlett Vane, who are easy to flatten into stereotypes until you realize they have their own mixture of hunger, vanity, intelligence, feels, and moral failure. Evelyn's strategy deepened during those weeks. She photographed another 47 documents. She captured printouts Victor had carelessly left in a drawer, feels. She followed paths through names, addresses, dead signatories, offshore companies, and quiet wires between accounts whose purpose was concealment rather than commerce. Then she found the thing that shifted Scarlett from humiliation to threat, feels. Emails. Not romantic ones, operational ones. Scarlett was not merely sleeping with Victor. She was authorizing transfers. She was in the numbers. She knew enough to participate and not enough to outrun consequence. Feels. That discovery mattered for more than plot. It mattered because it forced Evelyn to abandon a comforting story. Scarlett was not simply a younger woman dazzled by an older man's money. She was ambitious, complicit, feels, useful to him and benefiting from that usefulness, feels. The world often teaches women to fight each other first because it is emotionally simpler than confronting the entire architecture of male entitlement and financial corruption that brought them into collision. Evelyn refused that simplification. Heels. Scarlett had made choices. Heels. Victor had built the system that rewarded them. Both things could be true. Diane, meanwhile, expanded the perimeter. She used private investigators sparingly. She pulled corporate records. Heels. She mapped the legal edges of what could be established cleanly enough for regulators and what would remain invisible. She also did something smarter than brute surveillance. She looked for the human weak points around Scarlett. Siblings, Heels, old resentments, family fractures. That led to Delia Vane, Scarlett's older sister in Boston, paralegal, estranged, quietly angry in the durable way only family can make you. Diane did not tell Evelyn to threaten her or bribe her, Heels. She told her to write a letter, by hand, on heavy cream paper. Introduce yourself as say only what is necessary. Mention the affair. Mention the humiliation. Ask for coffee as one woman wounded by the same person to another. Heels. Nothing about money, nothing about Adrian, nothing about the business. Heels. This is where the story becomes useful beyond entertainment. Because Diane understood something fundamental about human beings. Not every door opens to pressure. Some open to dignity. Heels. Some open only when a person senses they are being treated as a moral actor rather than a tool. Evelyn wrote the letter in blue ink at the small upstairs desk Victor had once called your little study, in the tone of a man granting a decorative hobby. Heels. She asked for coffee. Nothing more. 6 days later, Delia answered. I'll have coffee with you. I won't tell my sister. Come any Tuesday at 3 to the Blue Kettle on Hanover Street. Heels. You'll recognize me because I look like Scarlett if Scarlett had eaten a hamburger once in the last 10 years. Evelyn laughed when she read it. A real laugh. It startled her. Healing does not always arrive as peace. Heels. Sometimes it arrives as the return of involuntary reaction. She drove to Boston the following week. Heels. The Blue Kettle had exposed brick, uneven floors, and furniture that tried hard not to care whether it matched. Delia was waiting in the back. She did look like Scarlett. Similar bone structure. Similar eyes. But life had shaped her differently. Heels. Softer in some places, harder in others, less polished, more human. They did not shake hands. Delia said the first thing people often say when they have chosen honesty over courtesy. You're prettier than I thought you'd be. Heels. Scarlett always said you were a nothing. Good skin. No, Personnel answered. That's what she said to my husband. I've read the texts. Delia winced. Then apologized, not theatrically, just plainly. That plainness mattered. Heels. Evelyn told her the essential truth. Scarlett was involved in transactions that were about to become visible. Victor was the main target, but Scarlett would not emerge untouched. Evelyn was not asking Delia to help expose her sister. Heels. She was telling her because no one deserved to discover a family implosion from a headline if someone could spare them that shock. Delia cried a little, not because she loved Scarlett simply, because family grief is rarely pure. Heels. She admitted Scarlett had once called to confess she was seeing a married man. Delia had not answered. She had deleted the message. She had hated herself for months afterward. Heels. Not because Scarlett deserved protection, but because Delia wanted to believe she was the kind of sister who would pick up the phone. That conversation in a coffee shop did more than provide a possible warning signal if Scarlett panicked later. Heels. It gave the story ballast. It reminded Evelyn of something revenge narratives often flatten. Collateral pain is real. Delia had done nothing to deserve public humiliation. Marguerite, the housekeeper, Heels, had done nothing to deserve 11 years in a home thick with male entitlement. Even Scarlett, guilty as she was, came from somewhere. Heels. Some people become ruthless because the culture around them trains ruthlessness to look like adulthood. None of this excused what Victor or Scarlett had done. Heels. But it prevented Evelyn from becoming one more person who believed winning requires the erasure of everyone else's humanity. On the drive home from Boston, she cried for 20 minutes, not for herself exactly, for Delia. Heels. For the 24-year-old version of herself in Tuscany, in a white dress believing beauty and devotion, were evidence of safety. For Marguerite's sister in Lisbon, Heels, the woman who had once kissed her husband every night for 4 years, while planning her escape and later grew tomatoes in a garden far from him. Heels. For all the women who spend enormous amounts of emotional intelligence managing the moods and illusions of men who interpret that labor as natural background noise. Heels. Then she washed her face in a gas station bathroom and drove home because feeling was not the same thing as hesitation. Feels. She returned to Ashbury Lane and resumed the role. Victor held her in bed. He asked about her invented friend Marcy. He typed to Scarlett after she turned away. Evelyn could tell from the rhythm of his thumbs. Heels. In another life, she might have found that detail pathetic. In this one, she found it clarifying. Repetition is the downfall of deceit. Liars believe the content of lies matters most. It is the pattern that betrays them. Heels. The next morning, when Evelyn arrived at Diane's office, Adrian was there, sitting in a chair by the window with an actual newspaper folded in his hands. Something about the sight of that paper felt both absurd and exact. Heels. A man like Adrian would trust what could not be edited after the fact. Diane summarized the Boston meeting. Good work. Delia was emotionally usable without being broken. Then Adrian explained what his people had been doing. Quietly, legally adjacent, Heels perhaps, clean enough to matter. Heels. They had redirected transactions already moving through Victor's supposedly secure channels, so that when the right regulator followed the trail, Heels, Victor would appear to be hiding roughly $41 million of other people's money in ways too sloppy to survive scrutiny. No forged signatures, no fictional accounts opened from scratch. Heels. Just pressure applied to pre-existing corruption until it folded inward. A woman at the commission named Priscilla Okafor had been watching Hale Capital for over 2 years without sufficient evidence. Heels. She would soon receive a package that looked like an anonymous tip from a disgruntled employee and read like destiny meeting documentation. Scarlett's name would be in it. Not enough to send her to prison automatically. Heels. Enough to force her to choose between loyalty and survival. When Diane asked Evelyn for the record whether she understood the consequences, Evelyn answered aloud. Her husband would be publicly ruined, his company dismantled. Heels. His girlfriend's career burned to the ankles. On paper, Evelyn would leave with what the prenup allowed. Off paper, she would receive a portion of whatever Adrian recovered through channels she preferred not to understand too clearly. Heels. Victor would not know until the final night that any of it had come through her. Diane asked if she wanted that. Evelyn said yes. This is another point where realism matters. Real collapse is rarely a single event. Heels. It is prepared through small decisions by many people, a regulator who refuses to let go of a suspicious file, a lawyer who knows where leverage becomes law, a sister who sends one sentence at the right time, a housekeeper who chooses not to see. Heels. A wife who stops begging for tenderness and starts documenting facts. No empire falls only because of a dramatic reveal. It falls because arrogance assumes too many quiet people are harmless. That was the stage they were now entering. Not melodrama. Heels. Convergence. Adrian then described the final setting. Heels. Hale Capital's Spring Gala. Victor's favorite event of the year. Not the largest, the most curated. The one where he gathered the people whose approval mattered most to him. Senators, ambassadors, bankers, cultural ornaments. Power in dinner jacket form. Heels. It would happen on April 11th. At 9:17, based on recordings from previous years, Victor would be in the middle of his toast. That was when Evelyn would enter. On Adrian's arm, she would stop at the foot of the stage. Heels. She would not speak first. She would wait. Men in Victor's position always spoke too soon when embarrassed. Then she would speak clearly and quietly from the center of the silence. Diane booked an apartment at the Whitmore for that afternoon. Heels. A woman named Inez would dress Evelyn. Adrian would meet her in the lobby at 8:40. The car would leave at 8:45. Between then and the gala, Evelyn was not to contact Adrian directly, not to meet Delia again. Heels. Not to do anything that resembled preparation. She was to look, to anyone watching, like a woman slowly accepting that her marriage was fine. This instruction was not theatrical. It was educational in the simplest sense. Heels. Many people who try to leave exploitative relationships make themselves visible too early because they need relief more urgently than they need strategy. That urgency is human. It is understandable. It is also dangerous. Heels. Diane's genius was not coldness for its own sake. It was knowing that safety, leverage, and dignity often require patience longer than emotion can tolerate. For 32 days, Evelyn lived inside that patience. Victor brought her flowers. Heels. Booked a restaurant. Suggested they talk about having a child, which he had delayed for years whenever it might have centered her, rather than his calendar. Now, Heels, with his mistress still installed at work and his illegal money roots beginning to rot beneath him, he announced maybe this was the right time. Heels. It would have been laughable if it had not also been the sort of manipulation that breaks weaker spirits. A future child offered like a retention strategy. Evelyn said, "Let's see what the spring feels like." Not yes, not no. Enough for him to hear hope, feels. He kissed her forehead. She let him, and each time he became more tender, he increased not his innocence but the sharpness of his eventual humiliation. That is the paradox of late-stage guilt, feels. It tries to purchase retroactive virtue and ends by financing its own destruction, feels. By the first week of April, Victor had started believing in his own reinvention. That was one of his recurring talents. He could behave badly for months, perform remorse for 2 weekends, feels, and come away sincerely persuaded that the corrected story was the one that had always mattered. Men with money are often granted this fiction by the people around them. Their assistants smooth things. Their lawyers contain things, feels. Their wives absorb things. Their donors forget things. The world keeps handing them narrative continuity. Evelyn watched it happen in real time. He ordered peonies because she had once mentioned liking them, feels. He cleared 2 evenings in 1 week and framed it as sacrifice. He took her hand in the car at a stoplight and kissed it as if the gesture itself were evidence. He spoke about the Hamptons in June, about planting something in the garden, feels, about the possibility of fewer travel days. The performance was almost convincing because it contained fragments of truth, feels. Victor probably did feel in those moments something like tenderness, but people confuse feeling a thing with becoming the kind of person that thing requires. Love is not a series of emotional flashes. It is a pattern of conduct under ordinary pressure, feels. Respect is not implied by gifts. It is proven by the absence of contempt when no one is watching. By that standard, Victor had been bankrupt for years. Still, Evelyn would be lying if she said his changed tone cost her nothing, feels. At the mountain lodge weeks earlier, he had sat by the fire and looked at her with the face she fell in love with at 24. Firelight is unfair. It softens history. For a moment, the body remembers before the mind can intervene, feels. That is why many intelligent people return to bad situations longer than outsiders think they should. The body keeps archives the intellect cannot burn on command. A familiar voice, a hand at the back, feels. A certain way someone says your name when they want forgiveness without naming the wound. Evelyn felt the old ache briefly, then it passed. The ache did not mean she wanted him back. It meant she was not made of stone. Delia had said in the blue kettle, feels, "I hope you don't sleep that night." Good. That means you're still a person. Evelyn understood the wisdom in that later. Revenge without conscience curdles into another form of domination. The goal was not to become Victor in a dress, feels. The goal was to end the lie and step out of a system built on her silence. The difference matters. Adrian understood it too, though he spoke about it differently. Their few structured interactions before the gala remained tactical, feels. But under the tactics, something else was growing. Not about dramatic obsession, not a rescue fantasy. Something slower, harder to name, respect first, then a dangerous kind of recognition, feels. The day after the Boston meeting, Evelyn had run into him at the gallery he technically owned and privately admitted he did not understand, feels. He stood beside her in front of a painting of a man walking away and confessed he had bought 3 paintings in his life because he thought he should like them and liked none of them, feels. It was such an unnecessary truth that it unsettled her more than charm would have. He asked whether Victor's renewed affection bothered her. She asked whether it bothered him. Adrian did not answer directly, feels. He said they were not yet at a point where his feelings about her marriage were any of her concern and might never be. Then he offered her an exit. If she changed her mind, he would personally match the prenup settlement. She could disappear, feels. He would never come looking. Victor would never know. That, more than the money, revealed him. Not because it made him good. People like Adrian are not good in the uncomplicated sense, feels. But he recognized the moral difference between wanting someone's company and believing yourself entitled to their endurance. He wanted her to know she still had agency. He wanted the choice to remain hers. That is rarer than romance, feels. It is certainly rarer than seduction. When Diane later remarked, with professional irritation and private curiosity, that Adrian did not make that offer to people, Evelyn refused to follow the thought. It was enough that he had said it, feels. Enough that in a landscape crowded with men who assumed possession, one man had made room for refusal. The day of the gala arrived cold and bright. New York in April. A sky so clean it looked staged, feels. Evelyn left Ashbury Lane at noon under the pretense of a spa appointment and a fitting for a charity dress she never intended to wear. Victor kissed her cheek in the kitchen. "Tonight's going to be good for us," he said. "I can feel it, Eels," she answered with a small smile that revealed nothing. Eels. Then she drove away from the house where she had hidden in plain sight for 7 years and did not look back in the mirror until she reached the highway. The apartment Diane booked at the Whitmore was on a high floor with neutral walls, pale rugs, Eels, and the intentional anonymity of expensive transitional spaces. Inez arrived at 3 with garment bags and a kit that opened like surgical equipment. She was in her 40s, unsentimental, and kind enough not to perform intimacy she had not earned. Eels. "Hair first," she said, "then makeup. Eat something while I work." Evelyn had not expected to be hungry. She was, that also mattered. Panic often kills appetite. Purpose sometimes restores it. The dress was dark, clean-lined, severe in the right way. Eels. It did not costume her as a femme fatale. That would have broken the realism of the night. This was not a comic book revenge. It was a public correction dressed in excellent fabric. Diamonds at the throat, yes, but not too much. Eels. Inez looked at her in the mirror when they were finished and said, "You look like somebody people should not interrupt." It was one of the few lines that made Evelyn laugh all day. At 8:40, Adrian met her in the lobby. Black suit, white shirt, Eels. No visible hurry, no flowers, no compliments about her beauty in the obvious register. He looked at her once fully, then said, "You look like yourself," which was the assignment. She appreciated him for that, Eels. In the car, they did not discuss the speech right away. They went over timings, entry, pace, the distance from the doors to the stage. The likelihood Victor would try to step down from the platform versus summoning security, Eels. Adrian's assessment was that security would hesitate because confusion at that social level tends to disguise itself as etiquette. People in expensive rooms do not immediately believe they are witnessing real conflict, Eels. They assume there must be a protocol. That hesitation would be enough, Eels. Then, after a stretch of silence, Adrian said, "If at any point after we get out of this car you want to turn around, we turn around." Evelyn looked at him. "No speeches?" she asked. Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "No speeches, Eels. Brevity is respect when someone is deciding." She nodded. "I'm not turning around. I know, that was all." The Whitmore ballroom glittered the way old institutions glitter when they want money to feel like virtue, Eels. Victor was already speaking when the doors opened. He wore tuxedo confidence well. His family had been practicing that silhouette for generations. He was thanking donors, mentioning leadership, using words like stewardship, vision, Eels, and long horizon as if they had not been used for decades to wrap greed in respectable packaging. Scarlett sat where she always sat now, near enough to signal influence, far enough to preserve plausible innocence. Eels. People knew she mattered at Hale Capital. Some assumed the rest. Some probably knew. Eels. Most preferred not to inquire. That is another educational point hidden in glamorous scandals. Elite environments often run on calibrated ignorance. People do not need full information to assist wrongdoing. Eels. They only need an incentive to remain incurious. The doors opened, heads turned, the room adjusted. Victor's face changed. So did Scarlett's. Evelyn felt, not courage exactly, but extraordinary clarity. The floor under her feet. Eels. The weight of the diamonds. The air in the room. The gap between one heartbeat and the next. Adrian walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. She was grateful for that. It symbolized the one thing this entire plan had been built to restore. Not rescue, Eels. Partnership. Choice. When they reached the foot of the stage, Victor had recovered enough to try the old tools. "Evelyn," he said into the microphone. "This is unexpected." She said nothing. He made the mistake Adrian predicted. He filled the silence. Eels. "Ladies and gentlemen," he added, smiling too brightly, "my wife has a flair for timing." A few nervous laughs flickered in the room. Then Evelyn smiled. Not at him. At the room. Adrian had told her that gesture mattered. Eels. Smile as if you are there by invitation, because in a sense you are. Calm terrifies people more than tears when they are expecting a scene. Victor stepped down from the stage. Not quickly enough. Not gracefully enough. Eels. He approached her with the expression of a man trying to handle a domestic inconvenience without lowering his market value. "What are you doing?" he hissed under the edge of applause that had started and then died. Evelyn kept her voice low. Eels. Correcting the guest list. Then louder, still not shouting, she said, "Victor, I need the microphone." He stared at her, briefly forgetting that the room was watching. That lapse was costly. You could feel the social weather shift. Heels. The room sensed blood now, not scandal exactly, but the possibility of truth. Heels. Victor did not hand her the microphone. He said, "This is not the time," answered. "That's the only reason it is." Adrian stepped a half pace closer. He did not touch Victor. He did not need to. Victor saw him then, really saw him, heels, and something primal crossed his face. Recognition without a script. That was the moment. Adrian looked at him with complete composure and said, quiet enough that only those nearest could hear, "You should let her speak." Victor let go, heels. Evelyn stepped onto the stage. The microphone was warm from his hand. She looked out at the room that had watched her for years without ever really seeing her. Senators, donors, journalists pretending not to be journalists, heels. Wives who knew more than their husbands suspected. Assistants who knew everything. Scarlet in a silver dress frozen. Victor below the stage now, pale in a way Evelyn had never seen. This is where melodrama would ruin reality if handled badly. Heels. A real woman in Evelyn's position would not deliver a perfectly crafted monologue full of impossible legal disclosures. She would say enough, precise, damaging, verifiable. That is exactly what she did. "Good evening," she said. The ballroom went still. Heels. "My name is Evelyn Marsh, not Hart. Marsh." The room registered the difference like a dropped tray. "Some of you know me as Victor Hale's wife. That will no longer be necessary." She paused, not for effect, for breath. Heels. "I am speaking tonight because tomorrow morning a number of questions will be asked about Hale Capital, its financial practices, and the movement of money through entities that should not have been moving it." Heels. "Some of those questions will have legal answers. Some will have criminal answers. All of them will belong to Victor." Gasps now. "Not many." "Enough," she continued. "I have spent 7 years being treated as an accessory to a life I helped maintain." Heels. "Tonight I am declining the role." Heels. Her eyes moved once briefly to Scarlet. "And for any woman in this room who has ever been mistaken for furniture, let me save you some time. The people who use that language eventually learn what happens when objects begin to keep records." Heels. That line spread through the ballroom like lit wire. Because it was personal. Because it was comprehensible. Because it delayed corruption into intimate contempt. Victor moved then, stepping toward the stage. Evelyn, "Stop." Heels. The room heard that too. Heard the crack in it. Heard command where concern was expected. Evelyn looked at him. "No." Just that, no. Then she handed the microphone to the event chairwoman, Heels, who took it automatically because some habits of authority survive even in shock. Evelyn stepped down from the stage. Adrian turned with her. They walked back through the ballroom while silence broke behind them into the first hard burst of voices. Heels. Not applause, something more honest. Confusion, alarm, questions. Heels. Phones emerging, people doing the fast arithmetic of social self-preservation. Scarlet standing abruptly, Victor calling her name, a senator leaving by a side door. Heels. 2 men from a ratings agency already pretending they had always suspected irregularities. Adrian guided Evelyn not by touch but by the space he created around her. They reached the corridor outside before she felt her knees threaten to tremble. Heels. She stopped then, only then. He looked at her. "You did it," he said. She laughed once, almost soundless. "I know." Her phone began vibrating within minutes. Diane, then another number. Then 3 news alerts. Heels. Then Delia's promised sentence from an unknown Boston number. "She called me." Evelyn stared at the message and felt, unexpectedly, grief move through the adrenaline. Not because she regretted anything. Heels. Because consequence was now real in every direction. That is the thing revenge fantasies leave out. The satisfaction can be true. So can the sorrow. Heels. The next morning, Hale Capital opened down 17% before trading halted. By noon, federal interest was public. By evening, commentators who had once called Victor a visionary were using words like exposure, irregularity, shadow channels, Heels, liability. Priscilla Okafor's commission announced nothing, which meant everything. Scarlet retained counsel within 48 hours. Victor spent the first day calling everyone. By the second day, many of them had stopped answering. Heels. By the third, the board requested his resignation. Within a week, the townhouse was under review. The foundation's Gala committee had formally distanced itself. Heels. And Victor's father's old friends were sending messages written in that special dialect of the upper class that combines horror, disappointment, and an intense desire not to be quoted. Heels. It would take months for the legal process to harden into charges. Years for the full financial consequences to settle. But the social death was immediate. Heels. That, more than prison risk, was what Victor had never prepared for. Men like him are trained to imagine themselves as permanent. When impermanence arrives, it feels obscene. Feels. People later said different things about the fall of Victor Hale. That he got careless, that he got greedy, that he was unlucky, that he trusted the wrong people, that the market had changed, that regulators were making an example of him. Feels. That his personal life had become a distraction. All of those were partly true and mostly evasive. The simplest version remained the right one. He mistook intimacy for weakness. Feels. He built his life on women's management of his comfort and assumed that labor was inexhaustible. He treated his wife as if observation were not a form of power. He treated his mistress as if complicity guaranteed loyalty. He treated law as delay. Feels. Reputation as armor, and consequence as something that happened to people with worse tailoring. It took less than a year to reduce all that to court dates, interviews, and negotiated disgrace. Scarlett cooperated early enough to avoid prison, Feels, though not early enough to save her career. Feels. She spent months in private offices explaining why certain transfers bore her approval. No firm of consequence wanted her afterward. That in its own bleak way was educational too. Ambition untethered from integrity usually sells itself as realism. Feels. It says this is how the world works. Don't be naive. Take the deal. Ride the wave. Survive. Feels. Then one day the world works exactly as advertised, and the people who made cynical choices are shocked to discover that institutions treat them as disposable once their usefulness ends. Feels. Scarlett had chosen proximity to power over respect for herself and others. Victor had chosen entitlement over limits. Both choices were common. Neither was inevitable. Delia sent one more message a week after the gala. I saw the clip. You looked calm. Feels. I'm glad you told me. Evelyn wrote back, thank you for picking up this time. Delia answered with a single line. We don't get to redo the past. We do get to stop helping it continue. Feels. Evelyn saved that message for reasons she did not fully understand at the time, perhaps because it articulated the whole story more cleanly than any headline. Feels. She and Diane finalized the legal separation with almost offensive efficiency, once public scrutiny stripped Victor of room to maneuver. The prenup held where it held. The Hamptons cottage was hers. Feels. The accounts under her maiden name became the foundation of a new life. Adrian's promised share arrived in carefully laundered legality through structures Diane told Evelyn only the minimum about. Feels. And Evelyn chose not to become the kind of person who asks every question just because she can. Moral clarity is not the same thing as innocence. She knew enough to know Adrian's world was not one she wished to inhabit fully. Feels. But she also knew that in the narrow corridor where their interests had aligned, he had kept his word. That mattered. More than romance, more than danger, more than the speculation that followed them in certain circles. Feels. They did not begin with a grand declaration. They began with dinners that ended before midnight, with silence that felt companionable rather than punitive. Feels. With the startling experience of being asked a direct question and not punished for answering honestly. Adrian, for all the hardness history had placed in him, had one trait Evelyn found almost disarming. Feels. He listened all the way to the end of a sentence. People underestimate how healing that can be after years with someone who treats your words as ornamental. Healing, in fact, became less abstract in the year after the gala. Feels. Evelyn did not simply upgrade to a better man and call that recovery. She went to therapy, not because she was broken in the dramatic sense, but because surviving contempt leaves strange bruises on perception. She had to relearn ordinary things. Feels. That wanting privacy was not the same as being cold, that asking questions was not being difficult, that rest did not need to be earned through emotional usefulness. Feels. That she was allowed to prefer plain coffee with milk and a little sugar because preference itself is a small declaration of selfhood. She learned how often she apologized before making requests. Feels. She learned how quickly she scanned a room for male mood before speaking. She learned that much of what had seemed like patience in marriage had really been adaptation to low-grade fear of disapproval. Feels. This is perhaps the most valuable lesson hidden inside stories like hers. Grand revenge is memorable. Small recovery is what saves a life. The world is full of people who can identify betrayal but not disrespect. Feels. Manipulation but not chronic diminishment. Scandal but not erosion. Evelyn's story resonated far beyond the ballroom clip because women saw themselves in the earlier scenes, not only the glamorous ending, in the cold coffee, Feels, in the spare phone humming on the console. In the way Marguerite had walked quietly through rooms where she knew better than to ask questions. Feels. In the kindness of one woman telling another how she took her coffee after 7 years of no one asking. In the housekeepers about her sister who kissed a husband every night like she meant it until the day she left and built a garden elsewhere. Feels. Those details mattered because they restored scale. Power does not only wound at the level of headlines. It wounds in kitchens, in calendars, in names you stop using, in whether someone notices when you remove your wedding ring. Feels. Victor never noticed that Evelyn stopped wearing hers. People remember that detail because it is so brutal and so ordinary. Feels. Men like him can detect a market tremor from 3 continents away and miss the absence of a symbol on the hand they claim to love. Months after the gala, Evelyn visited Lisbon with Marguerite. It had not been planned that way initially. Feels. Marguerite's sister had sent photos of tomatoes. There was a joke about proof of life and weather and whose knees hurt more now. Feels. Then Evelyn said she had never been. Marguerite shrugged and said one might as well go before one got too old to enjoy stairs, so they went. They walked narrow streets that forced them to slow down. Feels. They sat in a small garden behind a little house with cracked blue tiles and drank wine that cost less than Victor once spent on cufflinks. Marguerite's sister, Elena, turned out to be funny in the clean, feels, dry way of women who no longer need approval from anyone in the room. She spoke about leaving her husband in 1987 as if discussing weather patterns she had once survived. The hardest part was not going, she said, feels. Slicing tomatoes with a knife sharpened down to usefulness. The hardest part was pretending each night that tomorrow was still going to belong to him. Then she looked at Evelyn and added, but once you stop pretending, feels, you are shocked by how much life was waiting for you elsewhere. That sentence stayed with Evelyn longer than anything else from the trip. Feels. Not because it promised easy happiness. Because it reframed rather than victory. Life was waiting, not reward. Not justice in a systematic sense, just life. Mornings, meals, work chosen rather than assigned. Feels. Conversations without strategic editing. The luxury of not being watched for compliance. Back in New York, she sold the Hamptons cottage and started a foundation small enough to remain honest. Not a vanity project. Feels. Not one more elite mechanism for laundering reputations through benevolence. She funded legal counseling and emergency planning for women leaving financially controlling marriages. Quiet work. Practical work. Feels. Workshops on understanding asset structures, digital safety, documentation, and the psychological tricks that keep people doubting their own right to leave. Diane helped build the legal arm. Delia, eventually, feels, took a position managing intake because real life is untidy and occasionally generous in the same breath. They did not call it empowerment. Feels. Evelyn hated that word as it was often used, polished smooth by corporate panels and brunch speeches. They called it ground ledger. Because the first thing a person needs when stepping out of someone else's distortion is a record of what is real. Feels. Adrian donated without putting his name on anything. Of course he did. He also appeared sometimes late in the office on evenings when Evelyn was working through grant proposals or case summaries, feels, bringing takeout from one of the restaurants he actually did own, and standing in the doorway while she finished a paragraph. Their relationship, such as it became, remained stubbornly adult. No miraculous redemption arcs, feels. No promises that erased history. Adrian's world was still dangerous. Evelyn's past did not vanish. Trust built slowly, the way structures worth keeping usually do, through consistency, through the right kind of silence, feels, through the absence of contempt. Sometimes that is enough, sometimes it is more than enough, feels. Victor eventually took a plea, 4 years on reduced counts, financial bans that mattered more to him than the prison time. Men like Victor can survive confinement. What they cannot survive easily is irrelevance. The night before he reported, feels, he asked through lawyers whether Evelyn would meet him. Diane advised against it. Evelyn declined without drama. There was nothing to be gained by witnessing his regret, assuming he was capable of it, feels. Remorse from people who mistake possession for love often arrives only when possession fails. That kind of remorse is autobiography, not ethics. Scarlett married a venture capitalist from Miami 2 years later, feels. People said she had reinvented herself in wellness branding. Evelyn did not follow the details. Reinvention is common in certain classes. Sometimes it is healthy. Sometimes it is just a more attractive wrapper for the same hunger. Feels. She wished her no active harm. That too was part of healing. Feels. To no longer need your enemies to suffer continuously in order to confirm that you survived. As for the ballroom clip, it lived online far longer than anyone involved expected. Not because of Adrian, though his presence helped heals. Not because of the dresses or the money or the scandal, though all those created appetite. It endured because Evelyn's line about furniture landed where many people already hurt heals. In offices where brilliant women were ignored, until a crisis proved they had been carrying entire departments. In marriages where one partner confused domestic labor with natural scenery heals. In families where the quietest person in the room kept the best memory of everything. The clip was passed between sisters, colleagues, friends from college who had not spoken in years, women at 30 and 50 and 70 heals, and more than a few men capable of self-recognition. Some watched it for vengeance, others for instruction. The best stories do both heals. They entertain the imagination while sharpening the conscience. If you insist on a moral, here it is, though. Real life is always more stubborn than morals. Respect people while you still have the luxury of their trust heals. Do not confuse familiarity with ownership. Do not assume gentleness means inability. Pay attention when someone in your home, your office, or your orbit goes quiet, because silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is record-keeping heals. Sometimes it is planning. And sometimes it is simply the final stage before a person remembers they were never meant to live as background in somebody else's story. On the anniversary of the gala, Adrian took Evelyn back to the Whitmore heals. Not to the ballroom, but to the restaurant upstairs where the city opened itself in reflected windows and low light. He ordered wine without discussing it. She laughed and said she still did not know anything about wine. He answered, "Neither do I." Heals. "I know whether I like the company." They ate slowly. Heals. Talked about work, about Lisbon, about the Foundation's newest cases, about nothing dramatic. When dessert came, he placed a small velvet box on the table. Evelyn looked at it, then at him, and immediately said, "If this is a ring," Heals, "I'm throwing it out the window." Adrian's credit did laugh. "It is not a ring." Inside was an old brass key, plain, heavy, worn smooth by time. "What is it?" she asked. Heals. "A key to an apartment I bought on the Lower East Side 20 years ago under a name I no longer use. Nobody knows about it except my lawyer and now you. It is the only place I own that has never had a bodyguard, a camera, or a business reason attached to it." Heals. "I thought you should have a key." Evelyn turned the brass in her fingers and understood instantly what the gesture meant. Not possession, access. A place without performance. A place one could enter and leave by choice. Heals. It was perhaps the most romantic thing anyone had ever given her, precisely because it was not trying to trap her in symbolism. She closed the box and said, "That might be the first truly intelligent gift a man has ever handed me." Heals. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "High praise. Don't get used to it. Too late." They left the restaurant an hour later. Outside, the city was wet from a recent rain. Traffic moved in ribbons of reflected light. Heals. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked down the avenue, breathing air that smelled like pavement and spring and possibility. 1 year earlier, she had walked into a ballroom to bury a man's illusion of permanence. Heals. Now she stepped into an ordinary night carrying a small brass key and the steadier knowledge that her life no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. That is the ending worth keeping. Not just that Victor fell, not just that Evelyn won, Heals, but that she built something more useful than revenge out of what had nearly erased her. Heals. A clearer eye, better questions, a foundation that taught women how not to disappear inside someone else's money, a relationship rooted in consent rather than entitlement, a taste for coffee with milk and a little sugar, a name reclaimed, a self returned. Real life does not hand out neat justice often. But sometimes when contempt overreaches and the quiet person keeps the records, it offers something close enough.